All right, guys, now that you have your main stories kind of sketched out, you understand what a micro story is and how that's different than a macro story. You know the two different kinds of micro story being core narratives and those ancillary narratives. The thing that separates them is just which one moves the macro story forward and the other doesn't. So I teased this topic, this next topic, at the end of last video, in this something called additive comprehension, right? So this is a central tenet of multi-platform transmedia design. Every single touch point of the brand, every single story needs to add to the knowledge of the audience. It needs to make its own unique contribution to the whole, and that is something we call additive comprehension. So so this is vitally important. I don't think I can stress the importance of this topic enough. If you don't get your additive comprehension right, people aren't going to migrate from story to story. So additive comprehension incentivizes the migration of the audience, and that's the only way you get that that ecosystem working inside your narratives, right? So if you don't have any additive comprehension, or you have low additive comprehension, then the business model breaks down, because you're not baiting the fish to grab the hook, right? Like that's just an essential element of the storytelling that we need to make sure that we nail. So additive comprehension is vitally important. Every single micro story that you create, whether it's core or whether it's ancillary, needs to make a unique contribution to the whole through additive comprehension. So I want to give you a couple strategies to use when trying to come up with additive comprehension, and again, trying to make these things valuable, try to make them exciting. You know, the general rule with additive comprehension is give them something that's surprising, something that they don't really expect. Think of the best additive comprehension is almost like a plot twist or reversal. If it's the obvious idea, it's not going to be an exciting idea. Exciting ideas are the ones that we don't expect. So when you're coming up with additive comprehension and trying to determine the thing that we learn in this story, try to make it something that the fans can't really anticipate, right? And all of a sudden now that story becomes a valuable contribution to that greater whole, right? So that's the general rule. But at the same time, I want to take you through a couple different options and some strategies of how to identify additive comprehension that could be good. So good additive comprehension can be an origin story, right? Just showing how something came to be. We as fans, we love sort of the origin aspects of certain things. We love to understand the history and how things came about, especially as something if we fall in love with in the present, we then want to explore the past just out of natural human curiosity. And so, having a micro story explain the origin of something can be very valuable. And the origin could be something like a historical event, right? So going back and looking at a historical event, such as in Game of Thrones, when the wall was built, right? When the wall was built, that is, that's a backstory of an event of the wall. That would be super cool for fans to go back and see when that was done, right? In District 9, right? Going back to see when the aliens first landed and had contact. How did that come about? In The Leftovers on HBO, it's the origin would be figuring out seeing people disappear and really exploring when the 2% of the world's population disappeared in the blink of an eye. And so, going back and exploring a historical event in detail as part of the origin exploration is pretty cool. This is very akin to what we're doing already with macro story, right? A lot of times these historical events are the pieces of the macro story, going back and exploring when the apes took over, right? Obviously that's the central purpose of the modern the newer Planet of the Apes franchise, exploring that historical event. So so again, that is already kind of what we're doing with the macro story. So that so in a lot of ways, the contribution of the macro story when it comes to core narratives and core micro stories, those core micro stories will have natural built-in additive comprehension, which is that macro story event, right? So that's already going to be baked into the cake in those core micro stories already, which is awesome, right? But then we can also discover and explore origin stories of individual characters, right? So that can be very effective as well. Think of this was the whole attraction of the prequel trilogy in Star Wars, seeing the the backstory and the origin story of Darth Vader with one of the greatest concept posters of all time. You see that shadow as Darth Vader, which is just a super cool idea. But seeing the origin of Darth Vader, that's what got people excited about that prequel trilogy, right? Something like Hannibal Rising, seeing the origin story of Hannibal Lecter, Dracula, seeing that origin story of Dracula is what attracted people to Dracula Untold. Godfather Part 2, not very different than The Godfather, right? Maybe one of the best sequels of all time, but seeing that origin story of Vito Corleone really attracted people to that sequel. So we can see the origin stories of historical events, origin stories of characters, also origin stories of organizations, right? So X-Men Origins shows sort of the foundational origins of the X-Men themselves, right? You see the early days of Professor X's school. You see the formation of the X-Men themselves. That's what makes that set of movies interesting, at least conceptually. I feel like they kind of mishandled it a little bit there for a few films, but overall pretty interesting. The episode 3 shows the rise of the Empire. How did the Empire get started? This is the origin of the Empire. Really, I guess you can look at the entire prequel trilogy as that as well, but you really kind of get to see the origin of not only Darth Vader, but then the Empire as well, which is pretty interesting. Also, a major death. A major death can be really good additive comprehension because when it's a significant death, people want to they want to check that out, right? Force Awakens, you see the death of Han Solo, which makes that a very important puzzle piece in the larger Star Wars mythos, right? You see, Dumbledore's death in a Harry Potter movie. You see the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. That was just like so crazy and so wild because it was so significant in that death. So deaths can be they can draw people want to see, especially if it's a character they care about. They want to kind of see them go out. I remember there was an extended universe book of Star Wars back when I was in college, I believe, or maybe even high school. And there was a zillion of these extended universe books out, but then there was one, and I couldn't read them all. Nobody could read them all. There were so many of them. But I remember there was one where I learned that Chewbacca died in that book, and that's the only reason I went to go buy that book and read that book, was simply because this is the one that Chewbacca dies in. I have to be able to read that because that's a major thing, right? When a major character dies. Character reveal, just learning more about the characters. They don't die necessarily. It's not necessarily their origin, but it's an exploration that gives you a lot more interesting information about that character. I've referenced this before, but the comic book, the new Marvel comic books with Star Wars #7, where you find out that Han Solo is actually married to another woman the entire time, right? We're learning more about Han Solo. It's a big reveal about Han Solo that attracted me and other people to want to check out that comic, right? It was just a major piece of additional story. Overwatch does a really good job about this, and we've talked about Overwatch before. But you know, there was you know, the comic books and sort of their you know, their short films or animated short films. They do a lot of really interesting things, like this particular character. This comic book, in the comics, you realize that this character is actually a lesbian, which is a significant character reveal for that particular character, right? So you just revealing more pieces and more interesting things about that character only in this story, right? So anticipated showdowns. This is always a really good one. You know, especially depending on what kind of franchise it is and storytelling it is. You like to see those showdowns. And we know we have the main event showdown in the you know, in the macro story, but even you know, additional to the main event showdown, you can have other showdowns kind of littered throughout your different stories that people, you know, that people get hyped for. This is, you know, Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. This is these are these things that we wait for, and we're excited for these people to finally face off, right? I mean, you see, you know, in Harry Potter, you're just, you know, after 7 books and 8 movies, you finally get to see that epic showdown between Voldemort and Harry, or the good guys versus the bad guys, right? Obviously, the big attraction about episode 3 in Star Wars is you get to see that battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin, which is just so seminal in the Star Wars universe. Sticking with Obi-Wan, there was an episode of Star Wars Rebels where now older Obi-Wan has another showdown with Darth Maul, who he dispatches at the end of episode 1. And it was sort of this, you know, interesting rematch, you know, years and years and years later. And the way they marketed this particular episode was around this, you know, this major showdown that was going to take place in that episode, which drew the ratings up, obviously, tremendously for that episode, which is pretty cool. So so think about those showdowns. They can be emotional showdowns. They can be, you know, a showdown doesn't always have to be antagonistic. Maybe they're reunions, right? When you get the band back together, so to speak, that could be cool as well. Another type of additive comprehension is just revealing more about the story world. And learning more, like peeling away the layers of the onion about that story world, which could be significant, right? And so, you know, with The Walking Dead, they do a lot of cool stuff with The Walking Dead. You know, even after so many years, The Walking Dead is interesting because we don't know how the zombie apocalypse started, but then that became the attractive nature to Fear the Walking Dead, because Fear the Walking Dead went back and explored sort of the origins of the original spread of the disease. Now there's you know, there's a new third Walking Dead show called The Walking Dead: The World Beyond, that's exploring the reconstruction of the story world years, you know, several years into the apocalypse, kind of delving in again to the central causes of that zombie virus and how to move forward, which is pretty cool. Learning more about that story world, you know, what is outside of the central of the central show. You know, you're with The Walking Dead, you're very much kind of isolated in Georgia, Virginia, right? But being able to now explore outside of that into LA or into you know, Missouri, which is what you explore in the Walking Dead: The World Beyond. That becomes attractive because you're exploring and revealing more about that story world, which is pretty neat. In The Leftovers, you know, the Jarden is a really interesting small town. So inside a world where 2% of the world's population disappears, there's a small town in Texas where nobody disappeared, and it becomes sort of this weird Mecca sort of a place for people, this sanctuary for people, because they feel like they're going to be safe there. And so if you have stories revealing, you know, why is it that this place was safe when all the other places had people that departed, you know, learning more about Jarden inside the story world then becomes significant. Okay, so so think about that, learning more about that story world, whether it's like by way of an encyclopedic nature of that. I mean, you think about the Star Wars, they do those visual dictionaries with every movie that gives you more and more detail about the story world itself. That could be a role-playing game. Source books are also standalone pieces that give you more information of the story world itself, so you can consider those. And then, just like you're revealing more about the overall story world, another opportunity is having one story reveal something significant about a different story. And so you pose a question, or you pose a mystery box in one story, and then you answer that in another of your West Coast micro stories, right? That could be an opportunity. And so, think about with Star Wars, if you watch The Force Awakens, when Finn and Rey meet Han and Chewie for the first time, they have Rathtars on their ship, and Finn says, "How did you get Rathtars? That's crazy." And he said, "Well, we used to have a bigger crew." That's what Han says, right? So they just kind of like leave that there. That then becomes the opportunity in Star Wars Legos to have an entire episode revealing how Han and Chewie got the Rathtars and what happened to their crew. Right, that was the first one. Then the second episode of Star Wars Legos, if you watch The Force Awakens again, there's the significant amount of time where you don't see Poe Dameron. Finn and Poe, they crash in the desert. Finn wakes up, Poe's gone, and he doesn't meet Poe again until well into the movie. And there's a big gap of time left where you don't explore, you don't know where Poe went. Well, there was a whole Star Wars Legos episode about what happened to Poe and what adventure he went on during that gap of time, right? This actually folded into the continuity. So it's one micro story, right? The Star Wars Legos revealing something about a different micro story, which is Star Wars Force Awakens, right? Which is pretty cool. It doesn't reveal anything major about the story world or anything like that. It's just, it's one story serving the other story by revealing the mystery that was previously posed. So Star Wars Rogue One is another really good one, right? It's how did we get the plans to the original Death Star, and seeing that play out, that is revealing more about Star Wars Episode 4. Right, and so which it makes it sort of contextually connected, and so you're not learning necessarily more about the story world. You're just it reshades and reveals something posed in a different micro story. So these are all different types of additive comprehension. Learning more about the story world, learning more about the characters, learning about new things about different micro stories, big showdowns, big deaths, right? Like, and so you need to look at these things as they're bait for, like, just like if you're going fishing, you put bait on the hook, and when you go fishing, that bait is what draws the fish to the hook itself, right? And it's the same with additive comprehension. And so as you go into the development of your micro stories, make sure that there's multiple layers of additive comprehension into each micro story. And so I always like to try to make sure that each individual micro story has uses one, like at least 3 of these different types of additive comprehension. I make sure that I'm learning more about a character, also learning more about the story world, also learning also having a death, or maybe I have a death and have an anticipated showdown, and I'm learning a character reveal about a character backstory, or any sort of combination of the sense that just makes every story super, super rich and super, super valuable. And this is the same for core narratives, core micro stories and ancillary micro stories. Now, again, the core micro stories are going to, they already have baked into cake additive comprehension because of the macro beat, right? So that's the origin of that historical event. You're seeing that historical event take place, right? But you also want to add in a couple extra layers of additive comprehension about characters, story world, et cetera, et cetera. And so you want to, when you do that, you've now sufficiently packed in the bait and the draw. Hopefully, if you make these things valuable enough and execute it right, now you're creating a little bit of intertextuality, but you're also getting audiences excited about going from platform to platform to check out the content. So again, additive comprehension wildly important when it comes to the execution of a transmediated super story. So as you go through your micro stories, right? Or maybe you like to do a first pass through your micro story, but whether it's as you develop your micro stories, or after you develop your micro stories and you just take another pass through, you need to make sure every single one, core and ancillary, are playing a valuable contribution to the larger puzzle of your IP.